nobody knows with certainty when you're going to die. The only certainty is that you are going to die. And statistically, it's pretty well absolute that there's nobody in this room that's likely to be alive 700 months from now. So the question is not if you're going to die. The question is, how are you going to live in the limited time that you have left? Are you going to live your life fully functional, independent, till you meet your genetic potential and go to sleep one night and not wake up? Or are you going to find yourself completely dependent, unable to talk or move for years or possibly decades, lying in some nursing home bed waiting for somebody to come and change your diaper? So we have modern humans, they say about 109 billion have ever been born on the planet. And today we have about 8 billion, less than 8 billion still around. We have well-documented evidence that 5 people have lived past 117. So your odds of living past 117 right now are about 1 in 20 billion. So we can conclude that the odds that you're going to live less than 117 are somewhat better than that. If the amount of money we spent on healthcare correlated with how healthy we were, that is how long we would live, life expectancy, or how well we would live, healthy life expectancy, we should be the healthiest people on the planet. Because we spend 2.5 times as much money per person than people throughout the rest of the world. And yet, if we look at the data, we're not living longer, life expectancy. We're not living better, healthy life expectancy. We're lagging. So apparently, we're not spending our money on the right thing. Where we spend our money is treating the leading causes of death and disability, heart disease, cancer, and stroke. What we probably should be doing is spending our money on the actual causes of death. So the use of tobacco, alcohol, and poor dietary choices. If you look at the actual causes of death, you see things like tobacco lead the list, fabulously effective at causing premature death and disability because it affects virtually every organ system in the body. High blood pressure isn't far behind. In fact, if you don't have high blood pressure by the time you reach 65, you're actually abnormal. The average person has hypertension in the United States. Alcohol, if you read the paper, you'd think alcohol is some kind of health food. If you don't drink, you ought to start. That there's some powerful antioxidants like resveratrol in red wine. Is that true? Sure, and where does the resveratrol come from? The skin of grapes, so you could eat some grapes. They'll tell you that alcohol thins your blood and that that it'll reduce your risk from a clotting stroke. Is that true? Yeah, actually it does. It thins the blood much like aspirin. So if you're on a greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh diet at high risk for a clotting stroke and you drink alcohol, you have a slightly lower risk of dying from a clotting stroke. But you don't have a lowered risk of dying because you have an increased risk of dying from a hemorrhagic or a bleeding stroke. But if it's important that you die from a bleeding stroke rather than a clotting stroke, perhaps alcohol should be in your diet. Cholesterol is a marker for how much animal food you eat, and the more animal food you eat, the higher your risk from dying. Being overweight is also a major risk factor, as is physical inactivity, illicit drugs, and unsafe sexual behaviors. These are all conditions of dietary excess and lifestyle excess, not deficiencies. These are not going to be solved with pills, potions, and powders. These are conditions that it used to be only the wealthy elite could develop the cardiovascular disease, the diabetes, the autoimmune disease. They used to call them the diseases of kings. Today, of course, these conditions are ubiquitous. And we are getting fatter, there's no question about it. In 1986, shortly after I started practice, there wasn't a single state in the United States that had achieved a higher than 15% obesity saturation. And yet today, everybody's got higher. In fact, now we've got up to 30% in some of these states, particularly the homes of deep-fried ice cream. And now we're not just getting fatter, we're also getting sicker. And the diseases associated with dietary excess, like diabetes, are increasing precipitously. In fact, if you look at the correlation coefficients between increasing obesity and increasing, for example, diabetes, it's a 1-to-1 relationship. It's almost as if there's some type of connection. So what we're doing about it as a society is selling health food. We're telling people to drink olive oil and red wine and eat dark chocolate and coconut anything and Atkins paleo type diets. What I think we should be doing is teaching people to eat healthy foods. So fruits and vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, a whole plant food, SOS-free diet. SOS stands for the International Symbol of Danger, and it also stands for salt, oil, and sugar. In the world of our ancient ancestors, it was really difficult to get enough to eat and not get eaten. It was hard to survive. Most humans ever born on the planet didn't live long enough to reproduce. They didn't pass on their genes. They died, and they're not your relatives. They're the losers. Your relatives were the winners. They were the ones that got enough to eat, didn't get eaten. They basically pushed everybody else out of the way, and they managed to survive. And they had certain characteristics that allowed them to survive in that world of scarcity. Humans have been using tools, they tell us, for 1 million years. We've been using fire to process our food for 600,000 or 700,000 years. And 100,000 years ago, people developed the sophisticated use of language, which may be the most powerful tool the planet's ever seen, because it allowed us to accumulate information and pass it on in a geometric fashion. The brain of a modern human and the brain of a human 100,000 years ago is essentially identical. According to anthropologists, that's not enough biological time to see substantial change. And that means the brain you have in your head today is the same brain that an ancient ancestor had essentially 100,000 years ago. What's changed, though, is the environment, not the brain. We changed the environment, and that has profound implications. That's the world you were designed and evolved to live in, and that may have been more or less what the types of foods you would have had available. This is the environment you live in today, and today we process our food in places that look like this, and we eat diets that often look like this. The way the brain works is it stimulates the body to engage in behavior that favors survival and reproduction. And it was designed for that environment of scarcity. And the way the brain does that is largely neurochemically driven. Dopamine is the chemical associated with pleasure. The more dopamine, the more pleasure. And so it's not surprising there are only two natural behaviors associated with intense dopamine stimulation: food and sex. Food and sex. Food and sex. Unless you happen to be a male human, then it's entirely different. But whether it's food and sex or sex and food, these are the normal natural behaviors that are associated with the stimulation of dopamine, that are associated with the natural pleasure response, which makes sense, because what would happen if you didn't enjoy eating, if there was no reward mechanism? You might forget to do it. And certainly with sexual behavior, do you think people would go through all that huffing and puffing if there wasn't some kind of payoff? I don't think so. But human beings, being the innovative creatures that we are, we learned a way to short-circuit this system. We found that there were certain chemicals that could artificially stimulate dopamine production in the brain, one of those being alcohol. People drink because they like the way it makes them feel. There are other chemicals as well, including things like cocaine. Cocaine is a fabulously artificial stimulant of dopamine. In fact, it's interesting, and if they quantify the amount of dopamine secreted when you smoke cocaine versus have an orgasm during sex, there's 10 times more dopamine secreted using cocaine than having an orgasm. I was giving this talk in Los Angeles some years ago. An older woman, maybe mid-80s, she stood up and she said, "Excuse me, Dr. Goldhamer, where do I get cocaine?" That's not the point. Now, if that was the end of the story, we'd just say, look, drugs are bad, just say no. That would be the end of the story, but it's not, because it turns out there's chemicals that can be added to feed, for example, that will artificially stimulate dopamine production in the brains. For example, if you take mice or rats and give them ad libitum eating, they get to a certain size. But you put these chemicals in the feed, they will increase their weight 40% in just 60 days. Now, did the rats and mice get fat for psychological reasons? Did mommy rat not love them enough? Did daddy rat love them too much? Did they have stress of having to go to work? Or is it biological reasons? Did they get fat because you artificially stimulate their brain and stimulate more dopamine production so they systematically overeat and become obese? It's clearly biological. What are the chemicals you can add to feed of rats and mice and birds and people that will artificially stimulate dopamine production and make them fat? You all recognize that? Sugar. We've increased our consumption of sugar now to the point the average person is 150 pounds a year. I don't eat any, which means somebody's eating my share as well. And we've increased high fructose corn syrup, a particularly noxious version of sugar which processes in the liver and leads to fatty liver and cirrhosis, by over 1,000% since 1986. But we don't know why our kids are getting so fat and sick. We also can add this chemical to the food. It's called oil. It's not a natural substance. It's a highly fractionated food byproduct. It has 9 calories per gram. What's worse is we take it, we heat it up at high temperature, and then we use it as like to soak as a sponge calories into things like potatoes. We call them potato chips or French fries. I tell my patients, look, if you want to, instead of eating fried foods, just find the deep fryer, stick your head in it and suck, because that's what you're doing when you're eating those fried foods. 93% of all the calories consumed in industrialized countries now come from animal foods, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, or highly processed pleasure-trap chemicals, oil, salt, and sugar. Only 7% fruits and vegetables. And I know some of you are optimists, and you're looking at that thinking, well, wait a second, 7%. There's still hope. Let's keep hope alive. Of the 7%, a third of it's potatoes, found almost exclusively as potato chips and French fries. Fruits and vegetables no longer make a statistically significant percentage of the diet of people living in industrialized countries. It's called the pleasure trap. It's the reason why people are fat, sick, and miserable. You want to know? That's the reason. The artificial stimulation of dopamine in the brain from chemicals added to food leads to systemic overeating and is responsible for most of the health-related conditions that we suffer from today. The way it works with food is based on caloric density. The higher caloric density, the more you like it, because the more dopamine is secreted. Salad, for example, has 100 calories a pound. How many pounds would you have to eat to get the 2,000 calories that you need to survive? 20 pounds. Can you eat 20 pounds of salad? If you start at 6 a.m. and don't stop till midnight, you still can't get in 20 pounds, and your brain knows it, and your brain's not stupid. So when you put out salad, your brain says, oh, yeah, okay, well, I'll have a little salad till the real food comes along. But I'm not getting excited about it. Fruit, on the other hand, has 300 calories a pound, 3 times the caloric density, therefore you only need 7 pounds a day to survive. And as far as your brain's concerned, it tastes better. Why does it taste better? It has sugar, therefore it results in more dopamine stimulation in the brain. Potatoes, rice, and beans with 500 calories a pound, even more appealing as far as your survival mechanisms are concerned. You only need 4 or 5 pounds a day to survive with these. What if we invented a food, of course it doesn't exist in nature, but if it had 1,200 calories a pound, would you like it? If we introduced it at the World Fair in the 1800s, would it get rave reviews? What if we called it ice cream? If you melt it, it's described as sickly sweet. But when you eat it cold, it tastes good. Why? Why does ice cream taste good when it's cold, but it's sickly sweet when it's warm? It's because your taste mechanisms are not designed to detect sugar in an artificially concentrated substance like ice cream. So when you warm it up, you can taste what's there, and it makes you sick. It makes you just as sick when it's cold. You just don't know it. What about 1,500 calories a pound? A higher density than ice cream. Would you like it? Would we call it the staff of life? You ever seen this stuff? Crusty on the outside, soft on the inside. It's called bread. It's got 1,500 calories a pound before you turn it into a butter boat. Have you ever been in a restaurant and they put it on the table? It's free. Cover it over and it's all steamy in your brain, 1,500 calories a pound, and you eat a piece or 2 or 3, don't you? What do you notice soon about the bread in the basket? Yeah, it's gone. It's all gone. You open up the napkin, you spread it to the edge of the table, and you wait for the waiter. Finally, the waiter comes around and says, oh, did you want some more bread? And of course, you have to pretend like you don't know it's empty, and you look over and you say, sure, why not? But what you're thinking is, does this guy want a tip or not? And he brings you some more bread. Do you ever go into the same restaurant and ask the waiter to bring you 3 large baked potatoes and eat those before you order your dinner? Why not? Because you'd be too full. Because the human stomach can only handle about 500 calories of potato, but it can handle 1/3 of a stomach is 500 calories of bread. So what do you think you're going to get fatter on easier? Sugar, 1,800 calories a pound. Do you ever go into the restaurant and take 11 of those packets and just... Do you do that? Why not? It's free. What's the problem? Have you ever had one of those? How many teaspoons of sugar in one of those? 11, yeah. Now, it's not enough, because now you used to have the 11-ounce, 12-ounce Coke. Now it's the big gulp, the super gulp, the double gulp, the express gulp with free refills, and I swear pretty soon you're going to need a bucket. That's going to be... I think the leading reason for people getting hurt in the future is going to be getting a Coke at 7-Eleven. 25% of all the calories coming from teenagers now come from this sugar, soda pop, the sugar-sweetened beverages. But we don't know why the kids are getting so fat. 2,500 calories a pound chocolate. What tastes better, chocolate or salad? Is that a cultural thing? No, 1,000 people blindfolded, they can tell the difference. I tell patients, listen, if you want to eat chocolate, what you do is you just melt it down and rub it all over your belly and hips, and then when you're done, you don't have to carry it around. There was a survey done of women, and they asked women, not men, just women, what would you rather do? Have mad, hot, passionate sex, or eat chocolate? Most common responses, what kind of chocolate and how many pieces are we talking about? Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, I'll take this opportunity to ask you a question. I've always had this concern about fasting. What are the do's and don'ts? Like, can pregnant women fast? What if I'm doing a triathlon and training for a triathlon? Is that good for fasting?
Thank you for asking, because this afternoon, for those of you that will be here at 2:30, I'm going to be talking about fasting and how fasting can be a very useful tool at helping escape this pleasure trap that I've talked about today.
Okay, so I guess I'll wait for that.
So the question is, how much is the longest fasting that has been done at True North?
Well, we typically limit fasting to about 40 days. We find by keeping the fast relatively shorter, that's 40 days on water only, we can avoid a lot of the biochemical complications that occur with longer fasting. I did have a woman recently that we went, and I'll talk to you about her this afternoon, that we went to 41 days. And the reason is, she said the men, Moses, David, Jesus, Elijah, fast 40 days. Women always have to do just a little more.
And is the insurance going to cover it?
Yeah, insurance, True North Health Center is a 501c3 nonprofit research-based organization. Insurance covers medical exams and lab. The daily rate at the center, which is $149 a night, is not covered. However, if you'd like to have all your organs cut out, we might be able to arrange a special exemption.
So what's a profile of a typically good candidate for True North? If there is a woman, 75 years old, has some serious health problems, would that be a good candidate? Would that not be a good candidate?
So the biggest thing for True North Health Center is we do something really novel there, which is almost unheard of in medicine, and that's we actually can help people get well. If you have high blood pressure, or you have diabetes, you have autoimmune disease, you have lymphoma, you go to conventional doctors today, they're going to tell you, if you'll do what you're told exactly and follow the directions, they promise you'll never get well. You'll be sick the rest of your life and you'll be on drugs forever. What we find is there's a better way, at least with those conditions, these conditions associated with dietary excess, where you can actually get well through healthful living. Health is a result of healthful living. We teach patients how to live healthfully. That means controlling diet, sleep, and exercise. And when appropriate, we use medically supervised fasting to help facilitate that process.
Okay. Your thoughts on gluten, especially for people who have thyroid problems?
So it turns out the HLA-DQ gene that's associated with gluten sensitivity is the same gene that's shared by people that have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And the theory is that when you eat gluten and you carry these sensitivities, the body's immune system begins to react inappropriately and attack itself. If you detect your intestinal tract, we call it celiac disease. About 1% of the population manifests that. But there's another percentage of the population that the immune system may not attack the colon or the intestinal tract, but attacks the thyroid gland. And it results in a condition known as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, where, think about autoimmune disease. Autoimmune, it's your immune system attacking your body. So in thyroiditis, it's your immune system attacking your thyroid, and at least in some cases it appears that the consumption of gluten in sensitive people is one of the triggers that sets the immune system off in attacking your own thyroid gland. So it's important to avoid the triggers in any of these conditions. It turns out that dairy products, the proteins in dairy, particularly gluten, sugar, and other factors are commonly associated in conjunction with gut leakage to triggering autoimmune diseases, whether it's ulcerative colitis, ankylosing spondylitis, arthritis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, SLE, psoriasis, asthma, eczema, etc.
So since you said SOS was not permitted, so what do we do our cooking with?
So, for example, it turns out that a lot of the things you traditionally do with oil, you can do with any liquid. So whether it's a soup stock or water, you can what we call steam fry, and it's a way of getting the desired texture and flavors without having to put a highly concentrated, fractionated food product like oil into the diet.
Dr. Goldhamer, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
No, but